So. Hey, welcome everybody. Thank you so much for coming. This is really exciting. I'm Louie Barr. I'm the Managing Director of our Center for Public Interest Advocacy and Collaboration. This year we have a fellow, Professor Hartung, who suggested as soon as she started working with us that we bring all of these people in to speak, and I never thought it would work out all the same day. But they all agreed, and here they are, and we'll let her do the introductions. Oh, also, there's a reception afterwards across from 240 Doxer, and I have the great ticket, so come see me.
Okay, hi everyone. As Lily said, I'm Stephanie Hartung. I'm on the faculty here at the law school. And on behalf of CPAC, I want to thank you all for coming. I'm not using a microphone. Can everyone hear me? Okay. Back and let us know when the speakers start. I think the microphones are turned off, so which helps with recording. But if you can't hear someone, please raise your hand so we can make sure to turn them on. So I started my career as a public defender, and so I'm particularly excited about this panel today. In fact, Brendon and I started as public defenders together, deputy PDs in Oakland, California, over 20 years ago. I think I'm rounding down too. And I think, and I can tell by this group here, that this topic of holistic advocacy in the realm of public defense is of particular interest here at NUSL. I think in part because of our robust interest here among our student body in public defender work and criminal justice reform, advocacy, and community activism on that front. Just last year, we had over 10% of our graduates went on to become public defenders in various offices around the country. It's 23 of our graduates. So, but not only that, I think broader than just the public defender realm is that the philosophy behind holistic advocacy really aligns with our curricular focus here at the law school and our mission. And in particular, we have, as you all know, a focus on teaching our graduates to understand law in its social context, to look at legal systems more broadly and understand the disparate impact on marginalized groups. And that really connects with the work that these three do. So the idea of holistic advocacy is really a radically different approach to the traditional public defender practice. And in particular, as opposed to just narrowly looking at how to address one particular criminal prosecution at a time, the holistic advocacy approach actually takes a more interdisciplinary look at the various issues that each client faces, not just connected to criminal justice, but also mental health, housing, immigration, et cetera. And this topic is also, this philosophy that this group espouses is also very connected to the idea of close and intense community engagement. And it's also particularly timely right now, as there's just been a study that was published in the Harvard Law Review last year showing that the idea of holistic advocacy in the public defender realm is not just common sense and not just what seems like a good idea, but it actually works. And the study showed that the sentences were reduced by 24% under a holistic advocacy model, and that millions in taxpayer dollars were saved as well. So there are kind of arguments for everyone, regardless of political affiliation there. So we could not be more pleased to have this group gathered here who, honestly, they're not just leaders in the field, but these three really, they head up the most prominent offices in this realm, and they're the prominent thought leaders in the world of holistic defense. So we are so happy to have them all here in January in Boston, coming from much sunnier and warmer places than this. And so I'm going to just briefly introduce each of them so that we can spend most of our time hearing their insights. And then we'll have lots of questions, time for questions at the end as well. So alphabetically, and starting on my far right, is Aisha McWeay, who's the Executive Director of Still She Rises in Tulsa, Oklahoma. She's a career public defender, indigent defense advocate, and prior to taking over as Executive Director at Still She Rises in 2019, Aisha received her JD from Vanderbilt and joined the Nashville Public Defenders. She became an assistant public defender in 2009 and rose in the ranks in the office until she was ultimately appointed to the Deputy Public Defender for Nashville-Davidson County in 2017. She graduated magna cum laude from Clark Atlanta University, where she majored in mass communications with a concentration in public relations. She's served in a number of training and mentoring capacities to public defense and community service organizations, and in recognition of her contributions to the public defense community, in July of 2017, she was awarded the Stephen B. Bright Award from Gideon's Promise. And then closest to me on the left is Justine Olderman, Executive Director of Bronx Defenders. She is a skilled trial lawyer with over 19 years experience, representing clients in criminal matters, including complex felony and homicide cases. She's taught courses at Fordham and Seton Hall Law School, has been a guest lecturer at NYU School of Law. She joined Bronx Defenders in the year 2000 as a staff attorney, became the managing attorney of the criminal defense practice, where she oversaw the expansion of the criminal practice from 40 lawyers to more than 100 lawyers. In 2016, she became the managing director of the organization, overseeing all practice areas. Justine currently sits on the advisory board of the New York State Office of Indigent Legal Services, the Board of Chief Defenders of New York. She graduated from NYU Law School and spent 2 years clerking in the Southern District of New York, and she holds a BA from Michigan, University of Michigan in Ann Arbor. And then finally in the middle is Brendon Woods, who's the Chief Public Defender at the Alameda County Public Defender's Office in California Bay Area. With 20 years of experience in criminal defense litigation, Public Defender Brendon Woods has held positions of increasing responsibility in the Alameda County Public Defender's Office since he first joined the office in 1996. In December 2012, he was appointed Chief Public Defender, and he is the first African-American public defender in the Alameda County history. Brendon leads 170 attorneys, investigators, and support staff operating out of 5 branches in providing legal defense in more than 3,300 new files monthly. In 2013, his office was named Law Office of the Year by Alameda County Bar Association, and he has received national recognition as a leader innovator in public defense. He's a board member and former president of the California Public Defenders Association, and in 2006 was honored with the Harvard Law School's Wasserstein Public Interest Fellowship. He shares his expertise at speaking engagements around the country, and he's an expert in holistic representation, racial profiling, community empowerment, police reform, and models of immigration representation. And really, these were just the short bios, I promise, of these 3 who are incredibly accomplished and credentialed. So the first question that I want to put for the group, with whoever wants to start, is just if you could tell us a little bit each about your particular office and the ways that your approach both employs holistic models and departs from the traditional public defender approach. Let's start.
I'll start. The Bronx Defenders has been around for about 23 years. And when we opened our doors, decades ago, we had this sense that we could do better. We had this idea that public defense was not actually delivering on us, and that there was a way for us to be able to provide more for our clients. But the truth is that we didn't really have any idea what that meant or what that was supposed to look like. And so we sort of embarked on a little bit of a project to do something that, I don't know this already, you'll learn that lawyers are terrible at, which is that we had to stop talking so much and we had to start listening to our clients, their families, and the community that they came from. And when we did that, what we learned was that there was no doubt that people wanted a zealous defender who was going to swing for the fences every single time for them in court, that was going to thoroughly investigate the case, that was going to write creative motions, that was going to find the best defenses and just litigate the heck out of the case or find the best possible resolution that they could. But they also wanted a public defender who cared about why they were there in the first place. They wanted somebody to care about what the drivers were of their system involvement. They wanted somebody to care about addressing the underlying issues that society had failed to help them with or recognize in the years that preceded their system involvement. But it was more than that. One of the most shocking things, and even to me in the beginning of my practice, was that there were enmeshed penalties of their criminal system involvement that we weren't seeing. We weren't paying attention to. We didn't even sometimes know about. Issues like a criminal case triggering deportation or loss of housing or the loss of custody of one's own children. The cascade of devastating consequences was overwhelming, and we as public defenders were defining success in the most traditional ways in terms of case outcomes, right? Were we, in fact, helping our clients avoid prison? And that may have been really important to our client, and it was certainly important to us. But what if it turned out that we ended up resolving their case and helping them avoid prison only to land them in deportation later? We had to ask ourselves whether, in fact, we were helping or harming our client. And if we actually wanted to serve our client population well, then it meant that we had to look beyond the confines of a criminal case, what the drivers were of that system involvement and what the enmeshed penalties of that involvement was going to be, so that we could address those issues. And so what happened for us over the last decade, and the truth is it continues to evolve and grow, is a recognition that criminal defense attorneys were not the answer. We certainly weren't the answer alone, that we needed to bring people in to work with us and to work with our clients who had different skill sets. Social workers who listened differently, who talked differently, who heard different things, and could help us contextualize our client system involvement and also help connect clients to services that they desperately wanted and needed. But we also needed to bring in lawyers and advocates who came from different disciplines altogether, who did immigration work, who were familiar with the child welfare system and could represent parents in those related proceedings, who had a knowledge of the housing, system, of tenant advocacy, and what that looked like, and that what we ultimately ended up developing and building was what Robin Steinberg, our founder and the executive director that I took over from, labeled as holistic defense, which is, we can talk more about sort of the different pillars of holistic defense, but essentially it is this idea that we need to look beyond the traditional confines of a criminal case to understand the causes and consequences of system involvement and do what we can to address that.
I guess it makes sense for me to go, since Still She Rises Tulsa was born out of a project of the Bronx Defenders, and was founded by Robin Steinberg. So I did not found the organization. That is not me. I've only been at the organization for a year. However, when Justine mentioned figuring out what the community needed and what was important for advocacy in the community, that looks different in Tulsa, Oklahoma than it does in the Bronx, New York. I know many of you may be surprised by that. But for those of you who might not know, and for those of you who do know, Oklahoma has the highest incarceration rate for women really in the world. And why Still She Rises exists is really born out of that, and taking the lessons learned from the Bronx Defenders to create a model that does not replicate, because again, Tulsa, not the Bronx, but takes the things that were learned from the Bronx and the constant evolution and growth to build a model that is critical and crucial for what's happening in Tulsa, Oklahoma right now. And so what that looks like in particular to Tulsa is that you have the same types of issues that you see across this country, where a lack of resources meets overcriminalization of poverty, right? But you see it manifest with all kinds of complexities and procedural challenges in Tulsa. So removing a child from their home, their parents' home, or evicting someone from their housing in Tulsa happens much more quickly than it does in many places in the country, and particularly. That's a place where when Robin came to Tulsa in efforts to work with the public defender's office in Tulsa to try to infuse some Bronx defenders into the Tulsa PD, that didn't go so great. And folks were sort of like, what is this? Why are we doing this? And I don't want to do it. And for, a lot of stars aligning, and also the fortune and benevolence of one of our main funders of the organization, the idea came that, we've got a unique problem here in Oklahoma. We've got an epidemic here, and that is that we just want to lock up mothers and women, right? And we understand, we, Robin Steinberg, expert in this area, we who do this work and have done this work understand that incarceration is a cycle, and that when you incarcerate people's parents and their mothers, that it indefinitely and absolutely impacts the trajectory of that child's life or those children's lives. And so the idea that we've got to create something that tries to get in to address that is how Still She Rises was born. So genius that I didn't come up with, right? But the wonderful thing I think about the organization, which is now, we just celebrated our 3rd birthday on Thursday, is I think the real uniqueness about the organization is that how it was formed and sort of the areas that we entered into primarily on the front end were informed by the community. It meant going out and figuring out whether it's visiting the jails, whether it is door knocking through community surveys, truly engaging to figure out what the priorities and needs were for the community that we represent. And that community is primarily North Tulsa. How many of you watch The Watchmen? So a few people in the room. Familiar, for those of you who are not familiar, Tulsa is the basis or the place of one of the greatest massacres in the history of this country. And the Tulsa Race Massacre that happened almost 100 years ago in 1921 is one piece of a history that has continued to affect and impact the North Tulsa community since that time, and continues to impact that community to this day. And so when thinking about, I say we, I wasn't there, but when we thought about where to put this organization and where to begin trying to sort of chisel at this huge dynamic mountain of a challenge, it was in North Tulsa. It meant putting these resources and building a practice in that area first to try to address some of the systemic issues that bring people into the system, but also recognizing these patterns that when you arbitrarily kick people out of their houses within 48 hours of notice, that might impact whether they can provide for their children. And that also cycles into children being removed from the custody of their parents, and that's not okay either, and that can happen also in the blink of an eye. So our organization works to try to address that in a number of ways. Similar to the Bronx model, we have lawyers in different practice areas. So our civil practice or civil legal practice is primarily focused on housing. And then in our sort of family defense and criminal practices, which have higher volumes of cases and things that we see every day happening, the idea was that all of these lawyers and the advocates that we have on the team that I'll talk about in just a sec, and the investigators, and the person who greets people at the door, our reception coordinator, are critical in working together to really figure out what the needs are for this community and how to address them. The thing that I think is really dynamic about Still She Rises and really pushes the organization to the level that I didn't get to do this work for the first 10 years of my public defense career is client advocates. It's the advocacy practice. It's actually not the lawyers. Not the lawyers. I know you're in law school and I have to tell you that, but it's not the lawyers, right? because I think our model, which is sort of a hybrid and slightly different than the Bronx Defenders, but our model really has found that our client advocates really are the experts of this is what's happening. These are the resources that are and are not working for our clients in this community. This is the person who controls that resource. This is what they told me the last time I talked to them. This is actually what happened when I sat in on this DHS meeting. Did you know that they're incredibly racist and they say things like, can you do something about that? Can you file a motion in front of the judge? Can you talk to the judge about, to ask them to, admonish them for that behavior? We wouldn't be able to do that and make those types of pushes, those creative moves without the client advocates who are really, for us, folks who are from Oklahoma, folks who are from mostly out around the Tulsa area, are familiar with those resources and lack thereof, grew up understanding the complexities of this community, understand how North Tulsa has been impacted, and really can communicate and engage with our clients in a way that's genuine and engage with them in a way that is really, I think, critical for bridging any gaps that exist with the attorney-client relationship that could exist. And so it's really exciting to be a part of, really excited to be celebrating my 1-year anniversary here next week. And I am really looking forward to where we go, in the next 20 years when we're at the Bronx Defenders moving into their 40 years, we'll be trying to play catch up.
So good afternoon. Thank you for having us. It's an honor to be here. So unlike the Bronx Defenders, my office was created in 1927. One of the oldest public defender offices in the nation. And unlike the two officers to my right and left, I'm the only government agency here. So embarking on a journey towards political defense was a little bit more difficult because our office, albeit very good at the time, was steeped in a lot of history and tradition and looked at defense in one particular way. So I guess as I was thinking about this talk, going back to how did we get to our version of this defense? Now, I'm proud to say I started in our office. And the way it started was because way back when I first started, I was a lawyer. I was a real lawyer. I had cases, right? And I represented people in court. I was good at it. But I had trials. And when I first started as a public defender, I wanted to fight. I wanted to fight the government. I wanted to fight racist DAs. I wanted to fight racist cops. I wanted to fight them all. And I did it. And I was good at it, okay? And I tried cases. And I rapped 12. And I tried cases. And I tried cases. And that was what I was here to do. But you can't do this job like that without beginning to realize that even though you're trying cases and getting great wins and getting successful outcomes in the criminal arena, your clients have so many other issues that they're dealing with. They're talking about, where am I going to live? How am I going to deal with my fix? What's happening to my pet? What's happening to my kids? And so if you care about your clients in this space, you begin to think differently with regards to how you can do this work. Okay? And we'll talk about systems of oppression. They run deep. They are everywhere. And this is one of the unique places where we can attack those systems. Now, with regards to political defense, I think about when I started, people were talking about social workers and doing social work. As a lawyer, I'm not doing that. That's not my job. I'm a trial lawyer. But I've come to see the real value, and the value actually, and my thoughts around this defense came from students. You guys started it for me. So back before I became the chief public defender, I was the hiring and recruitment coordinator. And when I was going on tours and doing OCI and talking to students, they'd ask me, how do you feel about the Bronx Defenders? I'm like, who are the Bronx Defenders? I don't know about them in New York. I don't care about them. And they started to ask me, how are you on host defense? I'm like, I don't care. I don't know what you're talking about. And then I began to research and get involved and study. And it was it's commercial. My mind was like this. It kind of, everything opened up with regards to how you should be doing this work. And so I developed a plan. And once I was appointed chief, I began to put that plan into effect. We applied for a grant from the Bronx Defenders for technical assistance, and then we went to work. And so part of the models you hear us discuss trying to attack all those other consequences that can come out of poverty, can come out of racism, come out of contact with criminals in justice system. And that's how we work. So just in our 7 years on this journey, thinking about 7 years ago, we didn't have a single immigration attorney. Now we have 6. We didn't have a single social worker. Now we have 5, about to hire 6. We didn't have a clean slate unit. We had no one doing civil remedies for our clients or getting their records dismissed or felonies reduced to misdemeanors. Now we've got 3 attorneys dedicated to that work. And so we're not quite where the Bronx are. Nothing where you guys are yet. But we're on a journey to get there. And there are definitely challenges when you're looking at a government structure, how to change that structure, and how to get those resources to come in, because private funders actually don't want to fund government agencies. They think the government should be paying for it, and then the government doesn't want to pay for it. So a lot more challenges around that.
Great, thank you. So in addition to the interdisciplinary work that you all described, can you each talk a little bit about what, if any, policy initiatives your organization has gotten behind, either legislative, judicial, public education realm, and also the ways in which your work and the philosophy of your offices overlaps with other criminal justice reform efforts, in terms of reversing mass incarceration, Black Lives Matter, police and prison abolition, and those movements. That's a lot to that question, but however you want to address it.
Yeah, I'm going to start with the legislative piece, if I can. So I think our office has been pretty active in the legislative front, and we've been able to accomplish it. And I would say that it wasn't really on my radar until I was walking back from a meeting one day, and someone from my county department said, "Are you going to this other meeting?" I'm like, "What meeting?" It's like a legislative action team here. I'm like, "What?" It's like, "Yeah, you guys should come." And so I went to this meeting, and there's this county agency that will actually advocate, and we have lobbyists available to us for legislative laws and actions. And that the PD was not at the table for that at all in our 100-year existence for the most part. So we began to get involved. And we've taken on some pretty big steps with regards to propositions and other bills that we actually have a complete legislative team in my office, and we're helping to draft and craft legislation. 2 things that I'm probably particularly the most proud of as far as legislation. One was a bill called SB 395 that the governor began to consult with our office on. That was a bill that required police officers to now provide juveniles with counsel prior to taking a statement. I mean, that's amazing, because kids 16 and under will talk about anything at all times, no matter how they're advised. And so giving them counsel prior to that's been a great. And most recently, this year, we're able to get a bill passed. So in California, prior to January, anyone with a felony conviction could not serve as a juror. I mean, think about it. Anyone with a felony conviction, no matter how old, no matter if it's been dismissed, no matter if it's been taken off your record, no matter if the crime was no longer a felony, you could not serve as a juror. So because of that, in California, over 30% of Black men could not serve as jurors, which is kind of insane when you think about it. And so that came about from us trying cases and seeing that there was literally no diversity in our jury panels in Oakland, California. Okay. And so it took us 3 years of advocacy, but this year we got the right senator to carry the bill, and Governor Newsom signed it. So now people with felony convictions can actually serve as jurors in California. And we've been very successful in that.
So Oklahoma is a little more nuanced in how we handle policy, I will say. That being said, what we work on, we as Still She Rises, we have a direct service. We are a direct services organization. We also have an impact litigation attorney, and she and I work very closely dealing with the pending lawsuits that we have, but also with policy that comes across our desk. it's really important, and this is live stream, so I hope nobody is really watching it back in Oklahoma, that we are not on the face of a lot of things. We vet a lot of bills that come across our desks that are really bad, really bad. And our sort of philosophy right now is trying to push the people who actually have the power right now start thinking differently about how and why they're constructing legislation and what the ultimate goal is in that legislation, which requires a lot of conversations and a lot of early and late night emails and a lot of offline conversations that never see the light of day of us getting any credit for. I'm totally fine with that if the bill comes out better than it was before, right? And so what I've seen in even the short year that I've been here, I would venture to say that we've had dozens of potential bills come across our desk that have literally some maybe gaps that are structured and sought out to be progressive and helpful, that are like, oh yikes, yeah, no, you can't say this, don't use this, don't call clients this, you can't, no. But there is momentum there, right? And you have to appreciate that for a state that for the last 26 years has had the highest level of incarceration for women and has gone back and forth with Louisiana, number one, like totally overall. The fact that people are drafting legislation is progress, right? You don't want to squelch the progress of, oh, you're actually thinking about this, while also not condoning that this is okay for us, this is as far as we can push, which is a really delicate line. And so one of the things that I learned in my first 10 years of practice and when I became deputy in Nashville is that there are some things that you have to carry to the finish line and it's your responsibility to carry to the finish line. And there are some things where you need to sit back and you need to be in the bleachers and watching someone else carry to the finish line. So a lot of the logistics of policy for Oklahoma can't have Still She Rises' name on it. It can't. We actually have a pending lawsuit against the Tulsa County judges in federal court. So obviously, it would be not ideal for some of the people that we're suing for us to be the people drafting legislation, right? And there are all kinds of politics behind that. So we have to figure out what rooms we need to be in to educate folks so that they are thinking about what they're drafting and then figuring out how to nicely ask, can you send me that? To whoever is going to be the deciding factor. And being in the rooms, right? Making myself and other folks present in the rooms when those discussions are happening. When at that legislative session, even if it's sitting in the back of the room and then posing just like a random question, like, can you speak to this? So it's a little more complex than not more complex, different, looks different than being able to outright say some of the things that I would wish that I could say that Justine gets to say, but it's coming. There'll be a day when I get to do that, but for right now, it's a lot of behind the scenes navigating.
So I think for us as well, it has evolved over time. I will say that I think we as a public defender community, I think, have the ability and in some ways on behalf of our clients, obligation to try to push to be able to have that space, be in those rooms, be able to participate in that process. And I will say, sort of reflecting on Brendon and Aisha's comments, like I really think that actually the systemic reform work is the next iteration of right? If we sort of frame and ground all of our thinking about what we do in the question of how can we best serve clients and is there more that we can be? There's a piece of systemic reform that actually happens one client at a time. And just to go back to the RAND study for a second before following this train of thought, the RAND study was a 10-year study of holistic defense in the Bronx. And what it showed is that that individual representation writ large, thousands of clients over a 10-year period, the impact of that was astonishing. I mean, the results showed, in addition to the statistics you cited, that being represented by a holistic defender reduced chances of pretrial detention by 9%, reduced incarceration rates by 16%, and incarceration length by 24%. When you talk about like, what is the relationship between the systemic work that we're doing to reverse mass incarceration, I think in some ways we're skipping over the recognition that is way too late in coming, that actually the very nature of being a public defender is disruptive to the system of mass incarceration. Like, we are an intentionally deformed cog in the wheel of oppression that grinds our clients and harms them, their families, and their and that if you sort of step back from that and look at the impact of defenders doing their day in and day out work, standing shoulder to shoulder with their clients in the fight, that in fact is reform work. But that this idea of how can we constantly be pushing ourselves to say, okay, so I can do that in an individual case on behalf of an individual person, and I would argue that there is no greater calling in life than that work, than standing shoulder to shoulder with a human being when the state comes for that which matters most to them. But also we have to recognize when we're doing this work, actually another way that we can best serve clients is not to have them be in a position where they have to fight for pretrial liberty or to get access to evidence in their case, or not have a criminal, conviction necessarily trigger eviction and, a child welfare proceeding, right? So, and the way that we can also serve clients is to, in fact, engage in the impact litigation, that Aisha's talking about at Still She Rises, or the policy work that Brendon is talking about. And it's more than just that it is a natural, outcome of the question of how can we best serve clients. I have found myself over time, and this goes to the evolution you were talking about, Aisha, that like there was a period of time when we would get asked a lot to consult on legislation. And we were so grateful that like people were actually, that they were trying to change the laws that were going to benefit our clients, and they were asking us. And that there are like impact litigation shops that were coming to us and saying like, do you have a plaintiff for us? And we found ourselves feeling so grateful that they were consulting with us. And over time, honestly, it just really started to piss me off. And all of a sudden I was like, wait, this is totally backwards. There are these policy shops and there are these impact litigation shops, and they're coming to us. They've already decided what they want to be pushing. They've already decided what their priorities are, whether that's based on like their own strategic planning or funding opportunities or whatever it is. Like, that's not how it should be, right? That what we decide to push for from a policy, agenda, what we decide to sue about, that should come from our clients, right? And our proximity to the people who are harmed by the legal system make us not only appropriately suited to weigh in, but I actually think best suited to drive systemic change, right? That we can observe the patterns and practices and the ways that they impact and harm our clients the most, and that we can channel that proximity and expertise and experience into some really, incredible long-term efforts for change. And, you had referenced, like, how does it relate to other movements? Just like holistic defense tries to break down the silos between disciplines and practice areas, like, that is another wall that needs to come down. We talk about sort of one of the pillars of holistic defense is a deep connection to, the community that our clients come from. And part of that is being in touch with, attentive to, and responsive to what is happening in terms of grassroots movements in our clients' community. Like, we are lawyers, right? The vast majority, while we were trying to push this, the vast majority of people who work with the Bronx defenders, they do not grow up in the Bronx. They do not come from the Bronx. And they should not be dictating what is best for the Bronx. So it is really important that not only is the work that we're doing on a systemic, level being informed by our clients, but is also being informed by grassroots movement building. And what they are seeing is most important in the communities that they actually come from.
Thank you. So you've all maybe touched on this a little bit, but I wonder if you could speak a little bit more about some of the challenges that you faced in both implementing and expanding your holistic advocacy approach in your office. Brendon has the most.
So when I took over, you could say there were a lot of challenges because we've been doing our work one way forever. And so having this, even though I've been with the office for 20 years or 14 years of time, coming in and saying we're going to do things differently was very difficult. One thing that helped was being the hiring director for 6 years before that, because I was hired people who were going to be like-minded with the same vision of the office. So that really helped. But we made some real systemic changes, I think, before we even began to have a real conversation on vertical. And one of the biggest changes we did was, and was most controversial, was going from horizontal to vertical. And so just to explain it to you very quickly, there's two kind of models of reputation in criminal defense. One's horizontal, where one attorney might do the arraignment, the other attorney do the pretrial, the other attorney determine the hearing, and a different attorney the trial. So you would have 4 to 6 attorneys representing one client. And in my mind at the time, and still now, that was not the best way to practice. You have clients who's coming in, have to tell the story to that attorney or different attorney over and over again, doesn't build trust. And if you can imagine being a parent, father or mother, trying to call about who's representing your loved one or your son or your daughter, get a different person every time, or who do you call to speak to? I think it's a horrible, horrible system. And that's what we've done forever. Part of it was convenience, part of it was efficiency, and I didn't think it was best for our clients. So we changed that to vertical. There's one client, one attorney from beginning to end. Went vertical on juvenile practice, which is obvious. Went vertical on South County felonies. Then went vertical on North County felonies, which is Oakland. And that's when the kind of, for lack of a better word, the SHIT hit the fan. Right? It was difficult, and it took a lot of messaging, talking to our staff with regards to why this is ultimately better for the clients, and why this is a better way to practice, and why we need better lawyers because of it. And it was hard. It was a big change. I mean, I had 3 unions who were demanding meet and confer to talk about it. But we got through it. And ultimately, now, if you ask the attorneys, they say, yes, it is much better, and this is the way we should be delivering services to our clients. So that was kind of the first major hurdle. And then came adding the holistic lens, which came from adding in resources, too. And there's a lot of messaging around that. Like adding social workers, convincing attorneys we're going to do more work for you, but it's going to be better and better way to serve our clients. Adding immigration, adding the clean slate. Just adding all these pieces, great, and it did change the way we practice. But it also comes behind the funding due to it. And that's when you just have to be creative, whether it's going into grants, convince people this is a better way to practice, or just doing it and getting permission later.
So, I mean, sort of some of the challenges, even for us, right, where Robin created this model, created this vision, there were still challenges as we built our holistic defense model. And the truth is, there continue to be challenges, right? Like, in some ways, it is human nature to silo. It is human nature for, like, the civil lawyers to feel most aligned with the other civil lawyers, right? They were trained the same way. They're operating and working in the same systems. They have the same adversaries. They have the same language. You know, and that's different than the criminal defense attorneys and it's different than the social workers and the non-lawyer advocates. And so one of the things that happened fairly early on as these other practice areas began to develop and grow was that we went from an organization that had a criminal defense practice that sat together and a family defense practice that sat together, an immigration attorney said, you know what? the lived experiences of our clients is not to have all these issues be so separate. The lived experience of our clients is that these issues are all inextricably intertwined. And if we, like, people talk about holistic defense as being so radical, and the truth is, and we were just talking about this earlier in student meetings, that like, it's really actually just an attempt to mirror the lived experiences of our clients, and not just the lived experiences of our clients, but the system itself. Right? We think about like, oh, there's the immigration system, and there's the, you know, housing court system, and there's the criminal system, there's the child welfare system. Well, guess what? They are not separate systems. They are one system that talk to each other in ways that harm our clients with lightning speed. Right? The information technology that is available to these systems of oppression and the efficiency, talk about efficiency, how efficiently it functions so that a single fingerprint all of a sudden triggers a notification to, you know, the housing authority and the Department of Licensing and child welfare. I mean, it's instantaneous. It's like this, like some sort of like, you know, movie where you're seeing like all these people or like an official capacity looking at the screen. They press one button and all of a sudden you see like these lines go out. Like that's what's happening to our clients. So what we felt like we needed to do even structurally was to mirror that and try to make sure that people who did have interdisciplinary skill sets were engaged with each other in ways that allowed access to those services from a client perspective to be seamless, and to ensure that we were helping create dynamic and ongoing communication among advocates that had different skill sets, but were all working to advance the client's goals. And so we just like, we all of a sudden took everybody out of their pockets and out of their parts of the office they worked in and off their desks and said like, okay, now you're all going to sit together. Like, you three criminal defense attorneys, okay, now you immigration lawyer are going to sit next to him, and social worker is going to sit there, and an immigration attorney is going to sit there, and you are now a team. You're like a group that works together on behalf of a client. And that was totally radical. And the truth is, there are still people in the organization that are like, do you have to do that? And so knitting the fabric of holistic defense in and of itself, that culture, you know, change that you're talking about in your office, like not only does it exist at the inception, but it takes constant work to sort of knit those strands together. And, you know, we just have to keep reinforcing that this is in fact how our clients are forced to navigate these systems, and that to best serve them means that we have to mirror that. So culture, I would say, is one, and we don't have to get into the details too much because none of you are going to go out and start fundraising tomorrow, I imagine, but funding is definitely another.
So I spun it to Justine because I think some of the nuances of shifting culture and having organizations that have been longstanding are very similar for their experiences. I will tell you, coming into a really new thing as executive director is real complicated, especially when it is a startup organization and people are defining words differently. I think that's been the biggest challenge of this year. So what holistic defense means and how the folks who came into Still She Rises came to the work wanting to do this work. So it wasn't a like shift of, okay, now we're doing holistic defense. They came here wanting to do the work. That holistic defense meant something different for Brendon than it did for Justine, than it did for Aisha, and now they all got to work together with these different definitions that they're not talking about. That's really challenging, right? And so one of the real immediate priorities for me in getting to this organization, one, because I came from a traditional defense office that was taking baby steps towards holistic, is that I had to figure out what holistic meant to this organization, right? And unpacking that was really taxing for us as an organization because it really identified that, like, we are not on the same page. But that's okay, because then it was like, that's my job. We're getting on the same page now, because we're going to use some words that are the same for everybody. And when we talk about it, this is what we mean. This is what I mean. It's now what you mean. So that's hard, though, right? Because the reality of that, even though I make a joke about that, if your definition of X was different when you came into this work, right? And now you've got this new woman telling you that's actually not the definition, and we're operating off the definition of X being this. That's challenging. And we're public defenders, so we want to push back on that, right? And there needs to be space for that, because there needs to be enough space for the pushback to understand why we're doing what we're doing, and really be able to critically analyze that. There also has to be space and a responsibility for me to say, but this is what we're doing, right? That's hard. That's hard as a new organization where folks have really great ideas about that are really innovative and dynamic, and they want to do all of them right now, right? And having to say not yet, or we're doing this thing first, when it's not your personal priority, it's really been one of the biggest challenges for us in figuring out how to understand that us defining what these words are, as well as our core values really clearly, what our mission is really clearly, all of that has to happen here together as an organization, even if you hate it, and even if you are tired of coming to meetings. It's never going to be productive, and it's never going to be us meeting a mission if we don't have one, right? And every time we go out to talk about how wonderful and great what we're doing is, it's worthless if we don't know what we're doing and why we're doing it. And so I think for me, and I think for the organization, that's been a real evolution. I think we're in a really good place, but I would not lie to you to say that it hasn't been difficult to come in and really push people to define things that they sort of loosely were like, oh, we all get it. We all here for the, same reasons. And the reality is we're not. We're not all here in this work for the exact same reasons. They may be similar. They're not exactly the same. And we don't all see the world the same. And we all have our own unique lived experiences that color what brings us to the work. And it's important for us to understand that as an organization so that we can do that within the community that we practice and live and are embedded. And so for me and our organization, I think that's been the biggest challenge. When we talk about culture, it's a nuanced complexity of building a culture that sustains far beyond my life.
Thank you. So I'm going to ask just one more question, and then I want to allow plenty of time for questions from the audience. But so you all are speaking to a group of mostly law students, and in fact, for the 1Ls in the room tonight, there's a big deadline for them for completing applications for their first co-op rotations, and you all are incredibly accomplished attorneys engaged in the world and doing really meaningful things. So I wonder if you could just say a few words about what you view as the most important skills and characteristics that you look for and see in the new successful attorneys in your office, and also any advice you want to share about finding a meaningful career path as a lawyer.
I'll go first, because I think mine is probably more, I don't know if it's more unique there. So I have a non-traditional answer to this, right? Because particularly I will start with like 1L. For my office, I don't really care what you do 1L summer. Don't. As long as or what you have done prior to law school. I want a genuine interest in wanting to do this work and figuring out that you want to do this. I'm looking for people who aren't weird. And by that I mean weird in the sense that you can interact with clients in a way that I think is not alienating. That's what I mean by not weird. You'll be weird outside of that, and I'm totally fine with it. But I don't want you to, I'm looking for people to get to a level with a client, can take out the fact that you are a law student, you are a lawyer, and just talk to someone. Like you can talk to your mother or your friend, like a human. I care about that. We can do trainings on that, but at the core of it, I'm looking for people who are open to the training on that, right? I'm looking for folks who really are curious about what role they play in these systems that Justine talked about, right? And people who are comfortable being or okay being uncomfortable. that we're going to have conversations that may be uncomfortable for you, and folks who don't run from that. Beyond that, it really has to just manifest as something that is a sincere desire for you to want to do and want to learn more about, and not that you're just checking a box, but for beyond that, I don't have certain things that have to be done for me to be interested in hiring you, particularly as a 1L. Now, beyond that, you'll have to tell me a real good story if you're interested in prosecution and then want to come work in my office. Like, after that, right? Now you can tell me like the I saw the light story and all of that, but I will be upfront. I'm gonna have a real hard time with I chose to put people in cages and represent them. I'm upfront about that. That doesn't mean that in my years in Nashville and even in this office that I would never hire someone with a prosecutorial background. I have before, but that's an exception and not a rule.
I will not hire you for your prosecutor. Joking, but not really. Just to piggyback on that, that's some sort of weird myth that was put out by law schools way back when, saying, see both sides, get a rounded experience. Don't. Don't. If you at some point in time decided that you were going to use your legal degree for human caging, then we're going to have an issue. That's just, we're going to have an issue. And that's a deep hurdle to overcome going to apply in my office. Now, I think about this, I get this question a lot, kind of what are you looking for in a law student and what are you looking for in a future employee? And I put it in kind of two categories. First is the client side. You've got to be able to truly care and relate to our clients. If you don't care about our clients, if there's some sort of academic challenge for you, if you just care about fighting the system, don't apply. Don't come. Be blunt. I don't want you. Okay? You've got to be able to care and relate to our clients and be able to talk and communicate with them. If you can't do that, then you shouldn't be in field academic. And with that, as Justine said earlier, you've got to be able to listen to our clients. And I see so much as our role as public defenders is not to be their voice or to be their savior, but to amplify their voice, to make sure they are heard, to make sure that the community you're fortunate enough to represent is heard and they're represented in court. That's your job. And then on the other side, I see it as the skill set. You have to be able to do the job. You have to be able to write, you have to be able to litigate, you have to be able to try a case. If you don't have the skills, then you can't do the job. But for me, it's the marrying of the two. And I guess maybe to add one more, there's recognizing that this system that is in place, this criminal and justice system, is inherently racist. And you have to have some sort of racial components, sort of racial lens, and have a desire to, at the forefront, attack white supremacy and really, for lack of a better word, deconstruct and destroy the current system that is in place. I see public defense as moving towards a real movement towards movement lawyering and just not representing people in their criminal case. That's the way we should be going. I'm looking for that when I hire. I don't care about law school. I don't focus on grades. I don't clerkships. Good God, to do a clerkship. It doesn't benefit you. Sorry. Go be a PD. Enter in a PD's office. Get the experience. Get a hands-on experience. Dealing with clients. Talking to representing clients. That'll.
I think your answer, other than the framing of it around weirdness, is that weird?
I fixed it, I think.
But I totally get what you're talking about. And agree. That you have to be
clients the way, as Aisha said, you engage with somebody like you care about, right? You have to be deeply curious. You have to be invested in learning as much as you can and that they're willing to share with you. My sort of theory in some ways about the RAND study and what it is that allowed us to, engage with our clients in a way that produced those results is really about the power of human connection. I think we at Holistic Defender offices, we train our staff to ask questions that go beyond the confines of, the criminal case. And by doing that, we learn things about our clients, about their lives. And honestly, it sounds super touchy-feely, but I have to say, I think that it makes us care. Like, the more you know about a human being, the more you care about them. And that influences your ability to be an effective advocate. That transforms your ability to be persuasive. You stand up in front of a judge or a jury, a prosecutor, and they can sense that you don't care. There's just no way to be persuasive. And so I think that ability to connect with another human being is actually the most important part of the job. People have asked me in interviews what I think the most important quality is, and I actually think it's curiosity. And it's not curiosity like a distance, like I'm an anthropologist studying you curiosity. It's like a deep human curiosity about somebody else in their lives. And, the one thing and just to echo something that Brendon said, it's, as like a white woman doing this work, I will say that you have got to bring incredible self-awareness to the power, the race, class, power, and privilege dynamics between you and a client. And to be able to hold that, right, not be in denial of it, own it, and figure out how to make sure that it is not impacting your clients in, a harmful way. At the same time that you're sort of holding on to that recognition that you are working within a system of white supremacy. Just two other things. One, I will just say one place where I think we part ways is on that. I think we can teach people the skill set that they need to be effective litigators. I would not say that is high at all or exists at all in sort of the range of things that we look for lawyers. The only other thing that I will say that I think is a little complicated, and we're beginning to have conversations about this a lot, and I think you alluded to it, Brendon, is like, it's almost like you have to be able to bring that sort of lens about the system and understanding its impact writ large on, our clients. But at the same time, you have to be able to always put your clients first, right? And that's complicated. It is hard to be an abolitionist who goes into court every day and takes pleas. Like, that is hard. But that is the job at the same time, right? The job is to sort of hold that lens, but also recognize that your primary function is actually not to call the judge out for being a racist, right? Or the prosecutor. Believe me, there are times when that is totally appropriate and fully supported, right? But the first thought has to be, how is this going to impact the person who's standing next to me? That is your charge. That is your responsibility, is to make sure that what you do to fight the system is not something that will hurt the individual that you are advocating for. So as you're thinking about the work and you're thinking about I want to fight the system, I want to dismantle white supremacy, the legal system is not broken, the criminal legal system is working exactly as it was always intended to be. Just like oppression is endlessly creative, so is racism, and this is how it's manifesting itself today. That's great. Go for it, but you have to ask yourself, can I hold that and also hold my responsibility to an individual person that I am standing next to at the same time?
Thank you. So we're going to take questions from the audience, but first let's have a round of applause. Last question.
So Ms. Olderman and I talked about this a little bit earlier, but so I fled the world of social work in part because I think that at least the interpretation a lot of social workers have, in contradistinction to the way like doctors or other mandated reporters kind of see their duties, tends to be a little paternalistic and actually contributes to a lot of the child welfare system issues that we're seeing. And so I'm curious about in your offices, if you are hiring social workers, how you're dealing with the differences in the ethical responsibilities that the two professions have, and whether you've encountered those kinds of frustrations with social workers who see their personal duty as, being these kind of people that report because they're, the guardians of child welfare, which we agree, that children need to be protected, but also it's complicated, right? So anyway, that was a convoluted, I think by your laughter, you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, I do. And I have a really short, clip answer. I'm sorry. We don't hire them.
Okay.
We hire social workers, but if they have that issue and that conflict, we don't hire those social workers because they're not the ones we're looking for, and they actually often self-select out during the interview process. During our interview, like, well, maybe we're not a right fit, and they will say it themselves. It comes out, and so we try to avoid those social workers. They've got to have more of a client first, and the mandating reporting, I think it's a no. It's a no. They work under our umbrella, attorney-client privilege. If you think that is your charge, then we will not hire you.
So just as a follow-up to clarify, because I know that so many places that do work with social workers where there are attorneys, there's different perspectives, right, on the way that the kind of mandated reporting requirements conflict with attorney-client privilege, and some people are like, well, we need to separate them out. Some folks are like, they're subsumed under the client-attorney privilege. So for you guys, you see it as a social worker is part of the legal team, and so they are covered by client-attorney privilege and don't have additional obligations.
My office, absolutely.
Yes. Yes. Thank you.
So I know you have mentioned that. I was just curious as to what your thoughts were. People that say that they're.
This is like, can I just say, like, this is the worst panel of people answering this question. But we're going to try really hard. Our best. You.
I don't actually believe there is a thing, progressive prosecution. I think if you are a prosecutor, I don't care what label you use, what mantle you cloak yourself in, you're in the punishment business. Like, that's it. You are in the punishment business. Now, you may say, I'm going to punish different people, I'm going to focus on different priorities, but you're still in the punishment business. And public defenders are in the liberation business. Like, they're just completely anathema to one another. There's just like, there's no spectrum. Larry Krasner will come here and say, if you want to be a public defender with power, be a prosecutor. I know this is FaceTime Live, but I'm going to say it anyway. Bullshit. Like, that's just crap, right? If you actually want to defend people, if you want to protect people from the power of the state, there is only one job to possibly do, and that's being a public defender.
Yeah. So I think there are, in my mind, very few progressive prosecutors. Label that many people use, and it's not really backed up with any work or proof, I guess. I think what I would appreciate more is a reform prosecutor whose mission really is to disrupt, change the system completely. And I don't see anyone really talking about that. Because at the end of the day, even the most progressive prosecutor we know, they're still prosecuting and still putting people in cases. No one has come out and said, I will not send people to prison. No one's done that. And until we get there, I have an issue with it. And I actually do think, I think there needs to be people who are prosecutors who actually can see our clients as human beings. That is lacking. But I am extremely concerned about the progressive prosecuting movement as being very, very dangerous for the workers. I think it has the potential of drawing people away from to the defense side and getting suckered into this world that really doesn't exist. And people then begin to justify and allow punishment and incarceration because it's now progressive, right? It's now okay, and it's really, really not.
All of what they said. The one thing I will say, I was speaking to Rhea about this earlier, and I didn't really get to finish my answer, but I think the idea of progressive prosecution in and of itself is framed like completely incorrectly. It's just people doing what they should have been doing all along, which is dismissing cases that are BS, right? And so if that makes you progressive, that really just means you're actually doing the things you are duty to do. And so we really have, like, by creating that label, we have carved out sort of an exception that these other people get to continue to not do the things that they're supposed to do, because the people who are actually doing their job sometimes effectively get this cool, nifty label of progressive prosecution. I agree with Brendon, it's really problematic. Do I want people who are more fairness and justice oriented in prosecutor offices? Like, if you are compelled to be a prosecutor, do I want you to be more thoughtful about punishment? Absolutely. And no one's saying that we don't want that. But I do think this whole entire narrative of what we even define as progressive prosecution is based on what prosecution has been for hundreds of years, which is so incredibly problematic that any progress is progressive. And it's not. It's just like, throw the whole system away. Like, let's just start over is really what it is. And now we have gotten like these small increments of like baby steps of, we're not locking people up for marijuana when you can buy it freely, like if you look a certain way, right? Like, this is progressive. We're dismissing this. It just does not make any sense. And I really do agree with Brendon. Like, as I go to these different places and sit in these rooms and discussions about how to involve public defenders in, the reform movement, it's like, we've been here. What are you talking about? So progressive prosecution is just a catchphrase for people who actually do what they're supposed to do, comply with their ethical duties. And let's talk about all the people who aren't doing that and how most of those people should actually be disbarred for not complying with their ethical duties, and that we've just created this carve-out. It's just wow to me. I'm done. I'm sorry.
Tommy, did that answer your question?
Yeah.
Erica?
Yeah, I was wondering about the very powerful Harvey Weinstein and sexual assault, and address crimes that affect really vulnerable populations with very powerful people that never face any consequences.
Yeah, I mean, if you're on social media, you see this debate raging where you'll have people, coming out, essentially saying that people like Harvey Weinstein should be treated like our clients are treated, right? Which I think most public defenders would say, like, it's kind of backwards. It's like all the benefits that the wealthy and the powerful get, our clients should get, right? Opportunity to be at liberty while fighting their case, right? Like the benefit of the doubt, people who look really, look at allegations, see them as being incredibly consequential, really vigorously test the evidence in the case. Like, that's what everybody should get. And so I think rather than come at it from the viewpoint of like Harvey Weinstein shouldn't get that treatment, it's more like, our clients should get that, right? I do think that there is an interesting thing, and this is probably going to be fairly unpopular to say, but around sort of what is the impact of a movement like Me Too on due process and on the rights of individuals who are accused, I think there is a tendency, human nature, I guess, even among public defenders, I think when we're honest, we would admit this, that you hear about some sort of high profile case and somebody gets arrested, even among us, we'll be like, oh, I got the guy, right? And there is this natural sort of human response to sensationalized criminality, where we judge, right? We just do. We judge almost instantaneously. And I think we have to, if we care at all, or if we think that there is the possibility of a reimagining where people are treated fairly and equally, then we have to care about the impact of that kind of thing, and have to challenge ourselves to question our own emotional reaction to things that we see and hear, and say, what are the implications for those who are not as powerful? What does it say about me that I'm willing to judge so quickly, and perfectly happy to have that person's due process rights eviscerated, not have witnesses and evidence being rigorously challenged in court? Why am I okay with that here and I'm not okay? I'm not sure I personally think we can draw a distinction, or that we should be. I agree with you. For many reasons.
I agree too.
No.
I'm going to answer a little bit too. So from my perspective, I honestly hate high-profile cases. Think of going back to OJ, Weinstein, Brock Turner. Do you guys follow that at all? Those cases inevitably are horrible and horrific for our client. Because out of that sensationalism around that case, there'll be legislators that will push bad laws based on that case, and they will hurt Black and brown people. There's no way around that. But that's what's always inevitably happens. So when those cases happen, I'm like, oh God, what's next? What's coming? I can feel it. You think of the Brock Turner case, where that judge who followed the probation report with regards to sentencing, he lost his job for him. He lost his job, and then he went to be a tennis coach at school in his district. They hired him. People protested. He couldn't be a coach. He was fired from that job based on doing what he thought was right in a case, following the report and granting someone leniency in the case. So what sort of message does that send to every other judge in Alameda County, every judge in California? So those cases, it's terrifying. And I think there's some sort of, hopefully, onus on the public that I would love to be there, where we don't react to that one case. Because that one case can push back years and years of criminal, quote-unquote, justice reform.
In the front here.
Hi, thank you all. You all touched on taking direction from the community and trying to identify grassroots organizers that can really be the leaders for attorneys in guiding their representation throughout the process in the system. I'm wondering how you navigate, after your professional responsibilities with your client have ended, identifying kind of leaders in the community who might be willing to take charge in starting new grassroots organizations, or helping to guide your practice further, maybe without exacerbating their own traumas with the system, and how that conversation looks and what maybe challenges come with it.
I'm trying to make sure I understand the question. So I think we're all maybe a little bit different. So in Alameda County, we're in Oakland in particular, we're fortunate to have a strong group of human rights organizations. And it's my obligation as the leader of the office to make sure I have kind of a two-way street. As what issues I see, I bring to them, issues they see, they bring to us. One thing that we're trying to get going this year is further defense. Raj Jayadev, I can say his name right finally, in Silicon Valley, the Bug has this great organization there where they bring in a community and they partner with public defenders. They're really, really community driven. They support families who have loved ones incarcerated. And it's this real new form of defense where it's public defender and community side by side on individual cases. That's what we're trying to go with our community. I'm not sure if I answered the ethical question today.
I don't know that there was an ethical component necessarily.
I mean, I'll just add to that, same thing in terms of relationships with organizations that already exist, as opposed to trying to encourage our client population to start new ones. But, I'm also in New York City. There are like tons of grassroots organizations that are run by impacted people. And so Just Leadership, is one of them. We work really closely with them. I have, when I ran the criminal practice, I struggled with the question of how to engage and encourage clients to be a part of some of the movement work and the reform work. So I struggled a little bit with what's the moment in time when it's appropriate to encourage a client who may have just experienced something to channel, their experience into advocacy, to go and meet with a lawmaker. And I hear in your question, a question about the complicated nature of that. And I will tell you from an experiential perspective, it's complicated. I tend to feel like we should wait until a case is resolved. I don't ever want a client to feel like I'm encouraging them to participate in advocacy work and somehow their representation has anything to do with it. I have struggled a lot. This relates a little bit to the systemic reform work, conversation we were having earlier. A piece of the way that we think about systemic reform work is strategic communication. I think lawyers should get out of the business of telling their client stories, and that clients should be, sort of their own storytellers. What happens a lot is even, a media outlet that is very attuned to that we're trying to advocate for, they've still dictated what they want that story to be. And they'll reach out to defenders and say, do you have a client who is charged with a marijuana case where they were held in on bail and they lost their home and lost their job? And, they're deciding what story they want to be told, instead of clients deciding how. And one of the things I think about that doesn't yet exist, but I'd like to start building, is a sort of a storytelling sort of apparatus in our office, where clients who, it's sort of like if any of you are familiar with StoryCorps, right? People choose that they want to tell their stories. They'll interview family members and loved ones about an experience. Or the Moth. The Moth has this justice project where they invite people to tell their stories, recognizing that storytelling can be a powerful act of self-healing. And so if we allow our clients to self-determine who wants to tell their stories in that way, that what that might lead to is then the ability to say, do you want to use your story for greater advocacy and change? But so that it's driven by them instead of an external force saying, does anyone have a client who could go to, Albany and tell this story of impact? It's not, it's the same thing about sort of how we decide what systemic reform to focus on. It all should be driven by our clients, and our clients, I think, should decide. But I think there's more that we as public defenders can do to create opportunity. And for those who want to be advocates and storytellers, to be able to maybe build resources in our offices where we can help train people to be storytellers and to tell their stories of impact in ways that I think could be really powerful. I don't know if that actually was your question, but I decided to answer that one anyway.
Do you have anything you want to add? Sure.
They hit it.
Okay.
I'm trying to get some more questions in.
I know. And maybe we have time just for one more quick one. Gabby? Sorry.
So we talked about the differences in the Bronx and how much do you think that Tulsa's focus on women and imprisonment for affect that difference?
I'm not sure I understand your question.
Like how much does the focus on women and the difference between what's done in the Bronx and what's done like in the different places such as Tulsa?
I guess in the how much it's different, but I think that what Still She Rises is doing, period, in Tulsa is so different and foreign and unfamiliar to the entire sort of legal community as well as just everybody. Like they don't understand why we're there. They do, but they don't want to accept why we're there. I think that piece isn't different in the sense that people don't love that we're there. I think the nuances of representing mothers exclusively. There's a Tulsa public defender's office, right? So it's not that there's not representation beyond Still She Rises. And we're working collaboratively. We're working to try to address issues systemically together, as well as individual representation. So I think the nuances that are different from the Bronx are cultural, that don't really have anything to do with the sex of our clients, but actually that nobody wants to change anything, right? It was just fine before we got here. And the folks who identify that there may be some problems there, we haven't taken the momentum far enough to make any substantive changes. And so I think that's the distinction. And we're probably, I don't know that it's far removed from where the Bronx was 21 years ago. But I wasn't there then, so it's really foreign to me. And, when I talked to Robin, who founded both, there are many similarities that she talks about and speaks about. But there is definitely we all just get along here. We're making trouble here. That is very different than being in New York. I can go in the courtroom in New York and I'm like, hey, this is my kind of place, right? Just say what just say the things. I've watched court many times in New York and been like, I think I started practicing in the wrong place. This is more of my alley. But you can't, that's not, you say you can't, that's not accurate, right? And I want to embrace that. You can't do that. It is not, you're working to push the culture where it is not as much of a to-do that we are there making those arguments, those spaces. The action is not, well, why are you saying that to me? And literally, like, this is my job.
Thank you. I know there are a lot more questions. I'm sorry, but the good news is you all have drink tickets. There's a reception outside. These guys are going to be around, so please come and ask them their questions.